Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. I'm your host, Jack McCullough, and you can follow us online at rockstarcfos.com. Got a great guest today, so let's rock. My guest is Ajay Vashee. Ajay is perhaps most famous for being the former CFO of a little company called Dropbox. Perhaps you've heard of them. But now he's presently a general partner at IVP. Ajay, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Thank you for having me.
No, glad to. And we'll get into it more deep later. But for those who might not be familiar with IVP, and I have to admit I wasn't until recently, what can you share about the group?
Sure. Well, IVP is a 40-year-old venture firm. We're headquartered in California with offices across Europe. We're very active Series B and Series C investors. And we've invested in companies like Dropbox, where I was at, and many other companies across the software and consumer universe.
Great. Yeah, I checked it out. It's a very impressive portfolio you guys have brewing. So cool. Before we get into your career a little bit, I did want to ask, where did you grow up?
I grew up actually on a small island just outside of Seattle called Mercer Island.
Yeah, I saw you put it on your LinkedIn profile. So that made me curious. So are you from a big family, Ajay?
I'm from an average family. I had a mom and a dad, obviously, growing up, and I have one younger brother, 4 years younger.
Cool. And is he like in the tech business as well, or?
He works in climate change in the Bay Area as well.
Oh, good. Geez, good for him. You must be proud of your baby brother then. So
totally
nice, cool. Well, anyway, you had a great career, and you spent a little time in banking. But I'd love to chat with you about Dropbox. Dropbox was your first CFO role, right?
Dropbox was my first CFO role. Dropbox was actually my first operating role because, like you said, I started my career at Morgan Stanley in banking. I then spent a few years at a different venture fund, a fund called NEA. And it was actually while I was at NEA, we were doing some category work on file sync and share, the category that Dropbox operated and operates in, and really fell in love with the company through that process and ended up joining, leaving the world of venture to step into an operating role for the first time.
Yeah, you got to give you credit. For your first one, you picked a pretty darn good one. So it couldn't have worked out a whole lot better. So you had a great 8-year run. And if I have my facts correct, you took them public as the company CFO. Is that correct?
That is correct. I joined in my initial role to help build and scale the finance organization at Dropbox. And that was my first time doing that. And we had a couple of folks on the accounting team, and that was about it. And so it was a crash course in what a finance organization should be and an opportunity for me to go out and recruit talent across that org. So really helped me get up the learning curve on everything finance. And then I spent 2 years managing corp dev and M&A. So all of our acquisitions as a company. And those two experiences prepared me to ultimately step into the CFO role at Dropbox, which I did about a year before we got on file to go public and roughly a year and a half before our IPO. And I was CFO at Dropbox through the company's IPO and first 10 quarters, so 2.5 years as a public company.
Okay. And since you mentioned building the team, but a lot of people have shared with me, like the team to get you to the IPO sometimes isn't the same. It's not the same skill set, the same culture as the team after the IPO. So how did you manage that a little bit to find people that would fit on both sides of the transaction?
That's a great question. And it's totally true. So the initial finance team that I hired, that initial organization that I helped to build, many of the leaders in that organization went off to join a company, a Series A, a Series B startup, and work through that journey again from product market fit to 10, 20, 100 million in revenue. And there was a different team that we brought in to help the company get ready for an IPO and ultimately navigate that transition from the private to the public markets and operate successfully as a public company. And so the team we had when we were a smaller startup running the finance organization was certainly different than the team we had as we got ready for that transition to the public.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. And it's probably true, like it's the IPO, sure, it's the holy grail for CFOs, I suppose. And it's a transaction, but it's also a cultural event, right? Because you go Dropbox and a lot of companies, I'm sure, very passionate entrepreneurial, innovative type of culture. All of a sudden you're public and, you have to behave a little bit differently, right? There's pressure to make the quarterly numbers. So what was that transition for you as the CFO of the company like?
Yeah, it was certainly a transition. I think we were a very disclosive company internally to our employees, and that was an important part of our culture and really helped us achieve the scale and success that we did. And we had to be more measured in how disclosive we were and what employees had access to what information as we transitioned to being a public company. And so there was a cultural adjustment that I think was associated with that. But in terms of our mission and our vision as a company, and the energy we had as an organization executing towards that mission and vision, none of that changed. And we were really intentional about maintaining and keeping the company and the employees' focus on the long term, on the next product, on our customers, really on what was most important. And we really tried to mitigate the number of employees and people that had to focus on the short term and the quarterly earnings cycle, because that earnings cycle, as you alluded to, it does take up a fair amount of time, and it is naturally more short term in its orientation and focus.
Yeah, naturally it's going to change your department and the way you approach your job. But I suppose the magic is not to kill the great things that made the company IPO worthy in the first place, right?
It's really interesting that you bring that up, because I remember sitting in a meeting with one of the legendary crossover investors out there, the funds that would anchor your IPO and in many cases invest in you as a private company, support your transition to the public markets. Think funds like Fidelity or T. Rowe Price or BlackRock. These are really active IPO investors. We were in a meeting with one of them before we went public. It was myself and our CEO, Drew Houston, who's still CEO at Dropbox. And this investor asked us, "Hey, Drew, what are you most worried about in making this transition to the public markets? What are you most excited about?" And then I got asked the same question. And it had been hammered into me that to really avoid falling prey to the short-termism of the public markets. And this is a common mistake that too many companies make. And so I had that top of mind, and I responded to this investor and said, "Hey, like the one thing I'm going to make sure we don't do is fall prey to the short-termism of the public markets." And the gravity of that earnings cycle, especially being a CFO and a newly public company, is so powerful that even keeping that top of mind, I still remember we went public in our first quarter as a public company. We had given guidance, but then there were all these shadow numbers and shadow metrics that people were whispering about and expecting us to hit and meet. And all of a sudden, you're not only managing the company to the formal revenue guidance or the margin or profitability guidance that you've issued, you're also juggling some of these shadow metrics and numbers. Mm-hmm. And it became an exercise that involved too many people and too many resources. So I think even we, knowing how big of a trap this can be for so many companies, fell victim to it in our first couple of quarters as a public company.
Well, it's tough not to, right? I mean, you want to make the best impression you can on the markets right out of the gate. So it's like, ooh, your instinct and the principle is absolutely the correct one, but it is a classic one of those things, much easier said than done. So, but
I would fully agree with that. There was a panel I hosted recently, maybe to provide an interesting anecdote to that point.
Please.
And we had the head of FP&A from Netflix on this panel, and we had two private companies. And I asked this question: how do you approach resourcing at your organizations between the current year and the long term? So the next 12 months and the next 3 to 5 years. And the two private companies had an answer around 90% this year because you have to hit your numbers and keep executing and growing the business. 10% long term, it was somewhere in that quantum, 90-10. And Netflix's response was 0% on the short term, 100% in the long term, which felt like it was an exaggeration. But really, that organization they don't issue guidance, and they're just focused on building and creating revolutionary new content that'll come to fruition and launch in years. And that's how the incentive system internally is aligned. So that's almost a holy grail for people to get to from a capital allocation perspective. And so the more you can march up that spectrum over time, the more successful I've seen public companies be.
Yeah, 0-100 seems very hard to achieve for mere mortals, I think. So cool.
Yeah.
But cool. But other than that, any other insights you can share about, what it's like to be a public company CFO after a successful IPO?
Yeah, it's so for us, it was a very energizing and illuminating experience. It was a very clarifying experience. So a lot of companies tend to dread the process of getting ready for an IPO and then going public and being a public company. And we chose to take a more optimistic spin on everything. And we wanted it to be this milestone moment for Dropbox in many ways. but we also wanted it to, we wanted to lean into the best attributes of, what it takes to really operate successfully as a public company and make those an important part of our culture at Dropbox. And so for us, the process of writing that S1, of developing our roadshow presentation, of crafting the roadshow video that every investor in your IPO is going to watch, we leverage that as a moment to really get tighter on vision, on strategy, on our roadmap, on our objectives. And so it was really this galvanizing moment for the company working through the IPO process. And then we really tried to make the storytelling aspect of the IPO an energizing process for all of us, because you're in so many meetings and on so many calls back to back telling the same story. But if it's a story that you truly deeply believe in and is exciting to you personally, then it comes off as genuine and authentic. And we really made sure to craft the narrative that way. So our CEO, Drew, and myself could tell the story that way.
Yeah, that IPOs, I've always heard that's quite a bonding experience between the CEO and the CFO, right? Or maybe it goes the other way. I don't know, but sometimes. But what was did your dynamic change during the IPO process? Because you're, kind of, living with each other pretty much for several weeks.
Certainly during the roadshow, and then your first week as a public company, you're spending a lot of time together. I think we had a lot of mutual trust and respect between the two of us, Drew and myself. And I think you're right. It was certainly strengthened through the IPO process, and we really focused on executing that as well as we could. And I think the positive momentum that it gave us made our relationship and the company even stronger.
Yeah, because it's such a critical relationship, which, doesn't mean you have to go golfing on the weekends or anything, but that mutual respect, the support, the strategic thinking, and the shared vision, critical things for, companies these days. You just can't overstate it, particularly during an IPO, I have to think.
I think you're totally right. And some of the pitfalls that I see companies fall into is if they lean too heavily in one direction. To your point on the partnership, if the CEO is doing all the pitching, if the CEO is talking to all the numbers in these roadshow meetings and after an earnings call and taking that burden on herself or himself, I've seen that be a pitfall where the CFO doesn't build the right level of relationship with the buy side or the research analysts that are covering the IPO and you as a public company. And then on the flip side, if the entirety of the burden is on the CFO's shoulders and people don't have a relationship or a sense for the founding story and the vision and the product roadmap and the CEO, then their level of conviction in your ability to keep delivering durable growth at scale, it's not there in the same way.
That makes sense. So, well, Ajay, one of the things that intrigued me, and Ajay's team actually reached out to me about being a guest, which was, thrilling from our perspective. And but you developed what I'll call like a financial playbook in your time at Dropbox. And I know it's proven invaluable and flexible, and you're still using it to a degree. And I know you wanted to chat a little about that in the hope that it can be useful to some other financial leaders. But tell us a little about that. And it better not just be a more efficient way to close the books. I'm sure
part of it is a more efficient way to close the books. We had a mission statement as a finance organization. It was really important for us to develop this so we could engage and inspire everyone across the organization. And that was a mission statement of continuous improvement and strategic disruption. And so we always wanted to be improving as an organization on everything that we did, whether it was closing the books or how we managed the quarterly reforecast or our annual planning cycle, how we supported our business partners across the company. That fell into the category of continuous improvement. And then we always, every year, wanted to ideate and launch and execute to completion 1 to 2 trajectory changing projects. So that impact orientation was really important to us as well. So it was continuing to strengthen the core and foundation that we'd built with continuous improvement, and then changing the trajectory of the company through strategic disruption. And so to give you maybe 2 or 3 examples of what that meant for Dropbox as it related to continuous improvement, we set a goal out in my final year as CFO to save 10,000 working hours through finance transformation and automation efforts. And so we really leaned into a lot of emerging technology in RPA and really the early innings of AI and the applications of AI to the finance tech stack and to data to free up analyst resourcing and time. So people weren't spending time on rote tasks like parsing through data and dashboarding and reporting, but they could spend more time on the higher value activities like understanding what that data means and what we should do about it. And so we built a team around finance transformation and automation that falls under the continuous improvement umbrella. Then on strategic disruption, like I mentioned, we were always on the lookout for different ways we could operate as a company to unlock our true potential. And I'll give you an example of two projects that we helped to ideate and work on for Dropbox. One was as a private company, and one was as a public company. As a private company, we were really close partners to our infrastructure organization. And what many people don't know about Dropbox is, because they engage with the product at the application layer, is there's an enormous backend and infrastructure footprint to what Dropbox does to store and serve all of the billions and billions of files for its users globally.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, I use it every day. I can't recall it ever being down when I've used it. I'm sure, I'm sure it's down once in a while because everyone is, but it's a remarkable achievement. Anyway, sorry for interrupting you, Ajay.
No, of course. It's a great point. For us, reliability and uptime were really important service factors. But for the longest time, we had built and scaled the company on the back of Amazon Web Services. And Dropbox wouldn't have gotten to the scale it did, and it wouldn't be the company it is today had it not been for the availability of tooling like AWS and the public cloud to really get up to speed and scale very quickly. But at a certain point in time, our strategic finance organization, in dialogue with our infrastructure team, began to realize there could be a pretty compelling opportunity for us to migrate off of the public cloud onto our own internal custom-built infrastructure. Now, it was going to be a big and bold bet, but it was one that we felt would allow us to increase our gross margins pretty meaningfully. It was one that would allow us to improve performance, to your point, on service and reliability globally. There were certain regions in the world where we had really poor buffering speed for a video that you stored on Dropbox, and other regions where it worked just fine. And we wanted to control that ourselves by owning our own infrastructure. And then from a strategic perspective, at our core, we were this company storing the world's data, the world's most important content, and we wanted to own that data and content ourselves and not be reliant on a third party that might compete with us to do that. So we had these three rationale that we outlined, and we ultimately decided to engage in this build out. It was a $400 million capital investment as a private company, which raised a lot of eyebrows across our investor syndicate. I'm like, why are you spending all this money when you can just be leasing this capacity from Amazon? But ultimately, it allowed us to double our gross margins from roughly 40% to 80% by owning that hardware and software stack ourselves. And that margin expansion really opened up the IPO opportunity for Dropbox. It gave us true software gross margins and a profile that would be really attractive in the public markets. And so that was a really important project that we helped to spearhead from within the finance organization. It's a private company. And then as a public company, the last anecdote I'll share is we launched a project called Project Diamond. And it was an effort to really map every dollar of spend as a company and assign an ROI to that spend. So that could be performance marketing spend to acquire new business users, which traditionally has been more straightforward to manage and measure. There are some established practices and tooling out there to measure the ROI and return on that spend. But it could also be spend on legal contracts every year, or team building and offsite spend, or the spend on your kitchen expenses to feed employees. And we tried to actually quantify and assign an ROI to all of this. And it really opened up some interesting opportunities for us to pull back on spend without sacrificing our long-term growth aspirations or potential. And that was a project that allowed us to cross the formal threshold of profitability as a public company. So whether it was doubling our gross margins or crossing that threshold of profitability, we were always on the lookout. Every year, we wanted to launch one of these projects that would really fundamentally change the shape of the business at Dropbox.
Wow, that's fascinating. And, what's interesting, your background, you came from investment banking, and we're still, the most common path to become a CFO is through public accounting. So did you have, I know you've always shared that your team is instrumental in doing this. Did you have like a nice blend of people from public accounting and brought that skill set and that mindset to the project? Or were they more people like you that are kind of strategic finance? They're involved in these things?
It was, each one of these projects was a total team effort. And my team was pretty diverse in terms of their background, my team of direct reports. So I had a chief accounting officer who had worked through IPOs in an accounting leadership role successively 2 or 3 times before we hired him. So he understood that process inside out. I had a VP of FP&A who had led FP&A at a very successful public software company through their IPO, 10 years of beat and raise as a public company, and then ultimately their sale to Oracle. She was VP of FP&A at NetSuite. And then a VP of corporate finance and strategy who was a veteran managing director in the technology investment banking group at Goldman Sachs. So he led the IPO process from the other side of the table, 50, 60 times before we hired him and brought him into Dropbox. And then I had a great treasurer and a head of tax and an incredible chief of staff. And it was really that group of direct reports that allowed us to achieve the success we did, whether it was on these projects as a private or a public company or the IPO process itself.
Okay, cool, interesting. So, and my understanding is a lot of your former colleagues, the Dropbox alumni, if you will, are still using some of the methodologies that your team developed when you were there. Is that fair to say?
I think we created a culture in the organization that certainly people have brought into the companies that they've transitioned into over time. And whether it's Dropbox today, and one of the rock stars on my team took over as CFO when I transitioned out to join IVP. And I know a lot of that same philosophy is one that is still embraced there. Or it's other organizations. We had some of the stars on our strategic finance team have gone off to join OpenAI in senior roles. Actually, the chief operating officer and the VP of finance at OpenAI both began their operating careers at Dropbox in the strategic finance organization. And so a lot of that same philosophy and culture is present there as well. Or the CFO at Figma started off on that team as well.
Oh, wow.
CFO at Plaid. So there's a number of leading companies in Silicon Valley that really got their leadership teams, their finance roots began in that strategic finance organization at Dropbox.
Gee, your alumni network's better than Stanford's. So probably that's not true. I don't want to slam Stanford, but cool. But anyway, the tool now, do you share what you've learned with, I'm assuming you must share that with the portfolio companies that you're involved.
Totally. That's an important part of my job today. I spend a lot of time in active dialogue and really mentorship with our portfolio company CFOs, both the CFOs of companies I've helped to lead investments in, but more broadly CFOs across our portfolio. As they get closer and closer to a potential IPO, we ramp that dialogue and relationship up. And so that's one way. And then we launched a community at IVP shortly after I joined called the IVP CFO Collective. Mm-hmm. And it's really the first community of its kind for growth stage CFOs. So we bring all of our portfolio company CFOs, as well as other CFOs in the broader tech ecosystem, together pretty regularly for events that we try to make really focused and curated and relevant to the problems that they're facing and challenges they're facing on a day-to-day basis. A few examples, we hosted a pricing strategy workshop, and the team at Simon Kucher and Partners came in, which is the leading pricing strategy consulting firm out there, to do an interactive multi-hour workshop with every one of our portfolio companies to identify what was working, what was broken about their current approach to pricing that was really useful to many of them. We hosted in the wake of the SVB crisis a few working sessions with our portfolio on everything that we were hearing and mitigating action to take. We host an annual State of the Market dinner to walk CFOs through everything we're seeing in the market, which key metrics are most important today, how do these companies benchmark against the median deal, the 75th percentile, the 90th percentile deal that we're seeing, so they can get a sense for how that next fundraise might go or how they might be received when they ultimately go public. So we host that annual dinner. And so that's really important as well. So I try to stay very actively engaged and plugged into that community today.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you did steal my thunder. That was actually my next question, but that's okay. Well, great minds think alike. But I do, stepping back a little bit. So you made the transition from being a CFO to joining IVP. And, what attracted you to not only IVP, but just, a different career path altogether?
Well, I had briefly worked in venture before my time at Dropbox. And actually, when I was a younger associate in venture, looking around the table, I noticed that a lot of the best investors that I was working with at the firm I was at and co-investing with across the world of venture, a lot of the best investors were folks that had helped to build and scale enduring and iconic companies themselves. So they had real meaningful operating experience, and they leaned on that experience I saw every day to do what they were doing. And so I felt like if I wanted to build a longer term career in venture, which I do love and enjoy, that stepping into an operating role at Dropbox would be the best thing I could do for my career. And it's just been so true. And so I always had in the back of my mind this intention and thought that I might return to the world of investing. And if I was going to make a return, I wanted to return to a fund that was in the Dropbox family. IVP was our Series B investor at Dropbox. So I got to partner with the firm very closely as an operator for almost 10 years. And they were an incredible partner to us. And I wanted to join a firm that had a growth focus on Series B+, because my journey at Dropbox was our scale up from 100 to 3,000 employees, from 50 million in revenue to nearly 2 billion in ARR. And so it was and then private to public, as we've talked about. So it was really that quintessential growth journey. And that is the journey that we help companies on here at IVP. And so it was a combination of just knowing the firm really well and its focus on growth. And it's been an incredible place.
Cool. And I was going to ask you, so your firm's, it's a growth investment firm. Any particular philosophy you have in making your investments?
Well, we're most importantly a very active partner to the companies that we invest in. And so back when I was an operator at Dropbox, IVP helped to place our first lead independent director. That was Condoleezza Rice, the former US Secretary of State. She was an incredible force of nature that helped to shape the company in many ways. They
That's
were
a pretty
super
good
active.
name to drop, Ajay. So
They were super
Secretary
active
of State.
partners.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she was really, she started off actually as the first independent director we had at Dropbox. And then she quickly became our lead independent director through our IPO and as a public company. And so she was helping to run the board and manage the board of directors at Dropbox and many parts of the company in partnership with our CEO. But in any case, they helped to place her. And then the IPO process itself, we're so active with companies through that process. We've helped nearly 140 companies through that process in our history. And so there's a lot of institutional knowledge and domain knowledge that we have that we lean on. And then me as a former CFO joining the ranks here, who's been through that process recently, we're hands-on in a way that many firms can't be.
Yeah, it makes sense. How many active investments do you have right now, roughly?
As a firm, we have about 80 portfolio companies. And the majority of those are private, and roughly 15 to 20 at any point in time will be public investments where a company's gone public and we still have a stake in that public company. And then personally, I've helped the firm with 5 or 6 investments since joining 3 years ago.
And is your role when you're on the board of these companies then?
Typically, yeah. In the majority of companies that we invest in, we'll take a board seat or a board observer seat. So I'm on the board of most of the companies that I've helped us invest in.
And I'm assuming you're a wonderful mentor to the CFOs on those companies, right? So
I spent a lot of time with the CFOs. In fact, I was on a Zoom with one of our portfolio company CFOs this morning talking about both IPO readiness and investor targeting heading into that potential deal for them. So I do spend a lot of time with our CFOs. I also have to make a concerted effort to spend a greater amount of time with our CEOs because naturally I gravitate towards what I know best. And so that's been a new muscle for me to build, but it's been a learning experience and a ton of fun.
Well, we all know CFOs are nicer, smarter, kinder, and more often better looking too than the CEO. So why wouldn't you hang out with the cool kids on the
Exactly.
C-suite? So cool. But I'm just curious, one thing, like when I was your age, geez, I sound like my dad, but at this point in my career, it was still relatively rare for a CFO to get a venture capital type of role, other than to be the VC of the CFO of the fund, perhaps, but not in the role you're doing. Is that something more common than I realize? And is it maybe a trend of the future, CFOs becoming VCs and PE type investors?
It's not. It's a good question. It's not all that common today. I think historically there were a few different career paths into making it to the partner level at a venture capital fund. So the most common career path is starting off as a younger analyst or associate, and then building the right level of domain knowledge and a track record, and then eventually making it to the partner level. And I would say after that, go to market, like sales leaders and product leaders have occasionally taken a career path from an operating role into an investing role. But I think with the rise of strategic finance talent in finance organizations across the tech ecosystem, and more of folks graduating from those roles into the CFO role, so you have this rise of the strategic CFO. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw more folks over the next few years, the next 5-10 years, transitioning from those public company CFO roles of an organization they've helped take public into a venture investing role.
I think you just gave me the title for my next blog, for the rise of the strategic CFO. So, well, but you're right though, because there's more and more CFOs are becoming CEOs, and certainly for a while they've been getting seats on boards. Now, a lot of times it was just to be on the audit committee because you needed a financial expert, but now they're getting seats for their overall business acumen, not just their financial expertise. So yeah, it sort of seems like the next great thing that they'd be active investors too. So, but cool. Well, I wanted to changing gears a little bit. So you're a busy investor, you're on 6 boards, and I understand you travel quite a bit. And
I do. A lot of so we recently opened up a London office here at IVP, and a lot of the interesting deals that we see are in the US, but also more and more so in Europe. And so our focus is really between those 2 geographies. So I spend a fair amount of time primarily in France and Germany.
Okay. Where are you now, if I may ask?
Right now I'm in San Francisco in my office here with my DBX neon logo behind me.
Yeah, I was going to say, Pete, it's too bad that this is an audio experience for most, because he's got this really terrific looking Dropbox logo right behind him. So you're a lifer, it seems like, right? So
absolutely
a big time Kool-Aid drinker, but you have a lot going on in your life, not the least of which is you have 2 daughters as well. So how do you juggle all of your responsibilities in life?
Well, it's certainly a team effort, both at work and at home. At work, we have a phenomenal team here at IVP, both in the US and Europe. And so we work super closely together and we're always there for one another. And that really helps when one of us has an obligation, maybe personally or at home. There's always someone to step up behind you. And then at home, it is certainly a family effort. My wife is chief marketing officer at actually one of our portfolio companies, believe it or not. And so she leads an equally, if not more busy life than I do. But we are very lucky in that my parents and my wife's parents have both relocated to live near us
Oh,
and their
nice.
grandchildren. And so we have backup support really whenever we need it, which has been a lifesaver countless times.
Cool. And your wife doesn't happen to be VP of marketing on a company where you're on the board, is she?
She is chief marketing officer at one of my portfolio companies, which happened coincidentally, but I'm not on the board of the company, which is good. Otherwise, that would be a tricky situation. She's CMO at a company called Figma.
You could just heckle her and kill her at board meetings when she's making presentations.
I would love that. She would not.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a good long-term strategy, but how old are your daughters, AJ? Ajay?
Yeah, our daughters they're 7 and 4.
Okay, so real fun age, still adore daddy and always will, presumably. So
yeah, that's the hope. Although I've heard many interesting war stories from parents of teens, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Yeah, mine are 21 and 19. They're no use for the old man anymore. So I have 2 boys, so it's a different dynamic. But do you have any like interesting hobbies or other things in your life that kind of keep you busy as well?
So I do like to run to stay fit, and we live in a pretty hilly part of the Bay Area, so that's been a fun hobby that I've cultivated over the past couple of years. We are investors in a company called Whoop. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but they're the leading fitness tracker out there.
They're in Boston, aren't they?
They're headquartered in Boston. A lot of the pro athletes and pro leagues will use Whoop, but Whoop helped me really get into hill running, which has been a ton of fun and a great cardio workout. And so that's something I spend a lot of time doing. And then I love building Legos with the daughters. And so we're always on the hunt for a new Lego set. And our house is, we have a couple of closets that are just full of these fun projects that we've built together. So those 2 things keep me busy. And then traveling for sure. So one of the companies that I'm an investor in is in Germany. It's a company called DeepL, and it's an AI-powered language translation platform. So it's gotten me more and more into the kind of path of language learning. And so, given how much time I spend in other countries like France and Germany, I've started to try to learn the native languages there. Although I'm very much a novice, and so you can't ask me anything on this podcast today.
Okay, I had 6 questions, but I'm going to be nice and not put you on the spot. So cool. Well, I'd like to close this with if you could give some advice to the next generation of CFOs, maybe those controllers and VP of finance, or even maybe a first-time CFO, what should they be focusing on to, achieve success in their career paths?
It's a good question. And so maybe the approach I'll take here is actually not advice for those up and coming CFOs or VPs of finance, but more advice for CEOs when you're hiring for that CFO or you're deciding whether it makes sense to promote someone within your organization. That's a conversation I'm in a lot with our portfolio companies at IVP. And I think it'll be relevant advice and a relevant set of takeaways for the people in those roles as well. But my advice is to optimize for a really analytical CFO who will also be a masterful recruiter and a chief inspirational officer for your company. Because really finding someone smart is table stakes. So make sure you do that and you evaluate people the right way for that component of the role. But I think what most people underestimate is that a CFO's most important job is to build a world-class team. And what almost every CEO doesn't understand is how much your CFO is going to be a spokesperson for the company internally and externally, especially when you go public. And you have to hire someone that is able to craft themselves with their team, craft and deliver your company narrative better than anyone else, including you, better than you as CEO of the company. And communication is so important, and it can be the difference. If you can really tell a very compelling narrative and help investors build conviction that you're going to grow at 30, 40, 50% a year for the next 10 years in a credible way, then you're going to trade at a multiple that's 2, 3, 4 times higher, and you're going to be valued even more as a public company. And so most people get that part of the job wrong, and they'll optimize for this person's been there and done that. They might have come out of the big 4. They might have been CFO twice before, but they don't really optimize for that emerging and rising talent that's going to inspire people inside the company and out.
Yeah, it's interesting because I interviewed a lot of people who weren't CFOs, but they work with, and CFOs often work for them, investors and CEOs. And what makes a great CFO? And it was very rare that anyone would mention the technical skills. It was, in fact, I came up with an acronym for it. Let's see if I can recall. It was TRICE: transparency, resiliency, inspiration, collaboration, and empathy. And 5, 8, 10 years ago, if I said that's what you look for in a world-class CFO, people would have hit me, or at least roll their eyes at me. I'm from Boston, so in Boston I would have been hit. Maybe not in other part of the countries, but it is remarkable. It builds upon what you're saying, that it is really it's a people job. It's not an analytical. I mean, you have to be analytical, but it's about the people more than anything.
100%. People and communication. I would agree with you. Maybe last fun fact for you, our founder at Dropbox, also from Boston. I'm not sure if you knew that. He's from a town called Acton, Massachusetts.
Oh, sure. I live 10 minutes from Acton.
So we got to swing by on the roadshow, and he insisted every morning when we were in Boston for that leg of our roadshow that we stop at Dunkin' Donuts to get our morning fuel. So
a true Bostonian. Yeah, it's the Boston Red Sox and Dunkin' Donuts are the state religion around these parts. So, it's hysterical. Well, it's not really funny, but if you go to like parts of Massachusetts and you ask people, how to get to Starbucks, people are going to send you to a Dunkin' Donuts. I mean,
willful misdirection. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not mean-spirited, but why do you want to go to Starbucks? You go to Dunkin'. You're in Massachusetts. So cool. Anyway, this has been great. I know you're busy, so I do want to thank you for your time. But I just want to give you the last word. Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
No, Jack, this was great. So excited to be here and on the podcast with you. And I'm probably most excited about the next generation of rising talent in finance. And we have so many incredible analytical rising stars out there. And so if you're running the finance organization at a really exciting tech company out there, we invite you to join the IVP CFO Collective, and would love to have you be part of that community.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ajay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.